Hi there, my name is Caitlin Bandy and this is my channel BandysBooks, and today we're here for Tag Tuesday with another book tag. This time it's the whale tag. This was originally created by Book Time with Ryan and I was tagged by Kim over at Middle of the Book March. Thanks so much for the tag, Kim. So I was really excited about this tag. Every single question is themed after a different type of whale. And I don't think Kim knew this when she tagged me, but I am a rescue scuba diver. I certified in 2018 in the Galapagos Islands for open water, and then I followed that up by diving like 30 different times in 4 or 5 different countries throughout South America and Central America. I ended up in Nicaragua on Corn Island, where I did my advanced dive and my rescue dive licenses, as well as my deep and night certifications. And then eventually, like maybe a year later, I wound up in Alaska where I did a dry suit certification. At this point in life, I have around 100 dives, and I've dove in 4 continents, and I want to say like 9 countries now. I am really into scuba diving and marine life. So where that ties into this tag is that it's like a dream of mine to scuba dive with whales. Any of the whales on the list, I would absolutely just go batshit if I got to go scuba diving with them. I'm hoping that someday I will be able to make that dream a reality. I was totally geeking out about the different questions in this tag. So great job, Ryan, creating a tag that was really exciting for me. And from there, let's just go ahead and jump into it. These questions are a bit longer, so I'm gonna actually just read them off the paper instead of trying to memorize them for you and butchering them all. So question 1 is a blue whale. The blue whale is the largest, heaviest animal on Earth ever. What's the longest book you've read or wanted to read? Or what's the heaviest subject you've read about? So I think the longest book that I've ever read, or at least recently, is 2666 by Roberto Bolaño. It's about 1,100 pages long, and I did read it in Spanish, which is the language it was originally written in. It was quite the challenge for me. So this book is split into like 5 different parts. All 5 sections of the book are peripherally related to the femicide that's occurring on the US and Mexico border. This book is pretty gruesome and graphic, but it's incredibly well written. It discusses a lot of really relevant topics, and having grown up on the border of Mexico and the United States, the femicide in particular is something that I'm very aware of. And so it was nice to see a book actually talk about that, because I feel like it's something that doesn't get publicized a whole lot, but it is a really big problem. And then as far as the heaviest subject matter portion of the question, there's a lot of heavy subjects on my bookshelves. I have many a book about war. I have a lot of historical fiction that deal with, World War II in particular. I have some that deal with Vietnam. I have some that deal with slavery. Yellow Wife behind me is definitely one that's really heavy. But I think the books that I can think of that are the heaviest subject matter probably deal with human experimentation. I have some books, both nonfiction and fiction, that talk about Mengele and what he was doing to twins in the concentration camps. I even have a couple books that talk about medical experimentation here in the United States. And sadly, that is not as far back as you would want to think. This is like relatively recent history. So I think those are probably the books that have the heaviest topics for me. Question 2, sperm whale. Sperm whales routinely dive to a depth of 2,000 feet to feed on squid, but they can dive to a depth of 10,000 feet. What is a book that has motivated you to look deeper into a subject, character, situation, or series? So I could probably say that there are a multitude of books that have inspired me to dig deep into different topics. Every time that I read a book about something that I didn't know about before, I tend to do more research afterwards. So we could be here all night just on this one question. But one book in particular that I can think of caused me to do a lot of questioning of the realities that I was taught, questioning of my education in school, and a lot of deep research into the world in general. And that was this book called La Escuelita, which translates to The Little School, and it's by Alicia Partnoy. This is a book about La Guerra Sucia in Argentina. That's the dirty war. And this happened after Perón. So Perón's wife took over the presidency, and she was overthrown by a coup d'etat. And it was a violent overthrow. The people that took over the country had a very conservative bent, and immediately started going after the liberal citizens of the country. They rounded people up and put them into concentration camps. There were these death flights where they literally took hundreds of people and threw them out of planes over the ocean. This happened so frequently that bodies were washing up in Uruguay and Brazil, and it was an extreme crisis. The book La Escuelita is about Alicia Partnoy's experiences. Alicia was captured and put into a concentration camp where she was kept blindfolded, as well as all the other prisoners. Alicia describes herself as having a particularly large nose, and no matter how tight the guards tied her blindfold, she could always see under the little pockets left. So it allowed her to actually witness things that were going on around her. The reason that the prisoners were kept blindfolded was the guards had the theory that if they're blindfolded, they would never be able to identify any of the guards doing these horrific things. So Alicia was one of the very few people that actually witnessed people and could actually name people and say, I saw these things happen. And so when there was investigation into this years later, she was one of the few witnesses with like actual visual evidence. The thing that was particularly striking about this was how little attention was paid to it when it happened. Argentina basically went through this whole period of genocide, and the government just pretended like it never happened. Most of the families that lost members to this violence and to this horror never got answers. Their children, their husbands, their wives just disappeared. In fact, there is a group of women called Las Madres de la Plaza Mayo, which is the mothers of the May Plaza, and they march on Thursdays holding posters and chanting and asking the government for records identifying what happened to their children. And this happened like 50 years ago, and they're still marching because many of them still have no answers. It's only been in recent years that the Argentinian government has even recognized that this actually happened. So obviously, with all the information I'm giving you here, you can tell that it caused a deep dive into this particular topic. But what it also caused a larger deep dive into was this realization that American history classes don't really teach that much world history. I realized that if there was a massive genocide, you're talking like 50,000 possible victims that happened in a country as well known as Argentina, and I had never heard about it, not even a mere mention of it, that there must be quite a few other massive wars, genocides, and tragedies that I was completely unaware of. And so I was about 17, I think, when I read this book, and it caused me to do a ton of research into wars and genocides and things that I just was generally unaware of, because history here doesn't teach really anything outside of the United States and Europe. And it was really surprising. And then in 2018, I actually quit my job and went and traveled around the world for 2 years. And I spent almost a whole year of that time in South and Central America, Latin America, and I learned so much more. Like, I felt like I had done all of this research and all of this learning, and I had a good grasp of history. And then I started getting to these countries and learning what my country did to their countries and how the United States just basically messed with all of these governments worldwide. Question number 3, humpback whales. Humpback whales sing long, complex songs that they have in common with other humpback whales. These songs can change uniformly for entire groups of whales. What is a book that has changed meaning for you over the years, and why did it change? So I had to really think about this one, because I don't feel like books often change for me, mainly because I don't reread books very often anymore. I used to when I was younger. I had a handful of favorite series that I would reread frequently, like when I was feeling stressed out. But as an adult, I have so many books that I usually read a book once and then set it down. So if I'm not rereading, I don't know that it necessarily changes that much meaning for me. However, I will say that one book that I've reflected on and then realized some errors in my original opinions was The 7 Husbands of Evelyn Hugo by Taylor Jenkins Reid. So this book, I don't want to spoil it, but it's about a white passing Cuban woman who becomes a starlet in Hollywood, and the sacrifices that she has to make with her identity and who she is as a person to be famous. She is married 7 different times, and this book covers her 7 different loves and marriages. But what I didn't love about the book and what changed in my reflection, initially when I first read the book, I thought it was really powerful and interesting. I didn't necessarily think it was a 5-star like everybody else's. I think I rated it as a 4-star. But then after it sat with me, because there was something that just didn't feel right. Like, there was a reason that I didn't put it at 5-star that I couldn't quite identify. and it sat with it and I sat with it. And then I saw a video by Jessie on YouTube, which I'll link in the description below as well. And while I appreciate that Jenkins Reid is trying to write diverse literature and include diverse characters, I don't know if she's conscious necessarily of the fact that she wrote the only 2 Black characters in this book to be dealing with the really extremely traumatic situation and to be linked by this trauma. I can't quite explain it as articulately or intelligently as Jessie does, so I definitely suggest watching that video. But once I did watch that video, I was like, oh, this makes so much more sense. There's a reason I was feeling uneasy with this concept, and I've now been able to identify it via this other person, like explaining it in the words I didn't have. So yeah, my perspective changed on that one significantly. Question 4, orca. Orcas, or killer whales, are incredibly smart social whales, parentheses, dolphins. Thank you for that correction. I'm so glad that's there. What's a book you felt was especially smart fiction or nonfiction and made you really think? So I'm gonna go the fiction route, and we're gonna talk about Circe by Madeline Miller. I feel like everybody's read this book by this point, so I don't know if this is like a shocking selection or not, but when I read Circe, I hadn't read Greek mythology in forever. I think the last time was like in my freshman year of high school when we were studying the Odyssey. I wasn't that excited about reading it. I only picked it up because my mom had read it and she loved it, and we have very similar taste in books. And then jumping into the story, I didn't even know who Circe was. Like, I didn't know what her myth was. Without a Google search, I would have had no idea what I was getting into. I was worried it was going to be kind of a crusty, dry retelling of a crusty old story. Instead, it turned out to be a complete shakeup of Greek mythology. I loved the way that Miller challenged all of these views of Greek women. I feel like for the most part, women in Greek mythology are often portrayed as villains or as victims. And I really love that Miller did not write Circe as either. She does some things that are not the nicest, but there's clear motivations. She's not just some crazy evil villain, and she's also not a victim. Bad things do happen to her, but she doesn't lay down on the floor and just give up. She keeps moving forward, and she keeps changing her position in life. Since then, I've read a ton of Greek mythology retellings, and it has definitely caused me to think deeply about the way that we tell stories and how our current societal norms affect the mythology that we tell. Question 5. Beluga. Belugas are nicknamed the canaries of the seas because of the sound they make. What's a book you want to talk about after reading it? Why? So I feel like I always want to talk about books after I finish reading them, which is the whole point of this YouTube channel. But one in particular where I was like dying to talk to someone the minute that I finished it was We Are Not Like Them by Joe Piazza and Christine Pride. This is a book that is told in 2 parts. We have 2 main characters, a Black woman and a white woman. They're best friends. They grew up together. They've been through a lot together. The white woman is married to a police officer. Then this police officer shoots a young Black boy, and it sets off a whole chain of reactions. And we see this incident from both the white woman and the Black woman's perspective. And this book just leaves you with so many questions, so many things to discuss. I'm so glad that I read it as a buddy read with my friend Allie over on Instagram. We had literally like a 2-hour discussion just on all the different themes and things that this book touched on. Question number 6, narwhal. Male narwhals, known as the unicorns of the sea, have 2 teeth, including one long spiraling tooth that can grow nearly 7 feet long. What's a book you heard great things about before reading, only to discover it was less magical after reading? Gosh, I could give you so many answers for this question. So if we're talking about literal magic, I'm gonna go with The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue by V.E. Schwab. In 2020, when I joined Booktube and Bookstagram, this book was everywhere. You could not turn on a video or scroll through your Instagram feed without multiple references to this book. I picked it up thinking that it sounded amazing. We have a girl, she makes a contract with the devil to be immortal, but then nobody ever remembers her. She just disappears from history. And gosh, it was so boring. I probably should have DNF'd it, but everybody raved about it so much that I forced myself through this incredibly long, suffering book. I kept waiting for something exciting to happen. Instead, I got this weird, kind of creepy relationship between this girl and this devil, and nothing very exciting or of much consequence. And then a whole author that I find is less magical now that I've tried reading their books is probably Colleen Hoover. Again, another person that's all over the place. I picked up It Ends With Us last year because I'm not a big romance reader. I never have been. It's not my favorite genre, but everybody kept swearing, oh no, Colleen Hoover is so different. You have to give her a try. And It Ends With Us was the book of the season. So I picked it up thinking, oh, it's not very long. I can power through it. I DNF'd it. I couldn't do it. There was a scene where the male protagonist literally gets down on his knees, wraps his arms around this girl's waist, and begs and pleads with her to have sex with him after she's already said no. After they just had a discussion about why it's a bad idea. She wants a relationship. He doesn't like relationships. They both have completely different goals in life. And then he's literally on his knees with his arms wrapped around her waist, begging her for sex. And she goes along with it. And then it's just one red flag after another. We all ignore red flags once in a while. It happens to everybody. Like, I get that that happens, but this is just so cringeworthy. I could not force myself through it. Like, it just gave me the heebie-jeebies. I gave Colleen Hoover a second shot when I picked up Verity at the end of last year, I think in October for Halloween spooky season. And I mean, I managed to finish that one, but it was a task. It's another book that centers on really, really toxic and unhealthy people. I just dislike that a lot. And it seems like Colleen Hoover is kind of a one-trick pony. It seems like she just writes dysfunctional relationships in a super romanticized way over and over again. So for me, the magic definitely died once I found that out. Number 7, bowhead whale. While it's evident bowhead whales live well beyond 100 years of age, there's evidence that they may actually live to be 200 years old. What is the oldest book in your collection, or what book has been in your collection the longest? Okay, so I have 2 answers. The oldest book by date of publication in my collection is The Brothers Karamazov by Fyodor Dostoevsky. It was published in 1880. The copy that I have is obviously not from 1880, but the original publication is, so that's the oldest actual story in my collection. As for the book that I've owned the longest, that would be my copy of The Hobbit by J.R.R. Tolkien. I bought that in 8th grade. So I was a drama student in 8th grade, and my teacher decided that we were going to perform The Hobbit as a play. And in order to do the play justice, we were all assigned the book to read. So we went out, purchased a copy of it, and I've had that copy ever since. And it actually was one of the things that started my lifelong love affair of fantasy series. Question 8, the Atlantic gray whale. Atlantic gray whales were sadly wiped out by humans. Today, only Pacific gray whales remain. Save the whales. Yes, definitely save the whales. And all the other marine creatures too. What's one book that's either out of print or out of fashion that you wish would make a comeback? So I don't necessarily have a good answer for this. I don't have any specific books that I would really like to add to my collection that are completely out of print. I will say that when I was younger, I had a copy of The Long Walk that was written by Richard Bachman, aka Stephen King. And I know it's still in print because I've seen versions of it in print now where it says Stephen King as Richard Bachman or Richard Bachman as Stephen King. But I had a copy that I found like in a garage sale or something that actually just said Richard Bachman. It didn't say anything about Stephen King. And I got rid of it somewhere when I was younger. So stupid. Such a good book, first of all. One of the creepiest things I can remember reading as a young person. Like, I feel like I was shook after reading that book. But I feel like that book would have had some value now. So I wish I could get an original copy that still said Richard Bachman on it. Bonus question, Moby Dick. Moby Dick was a great white sperm whale that Captain Ahab never caught. What is a book you want to own but haven't found or bought? What's stopping you from hooking that book? So I have a rule in my household. If I want to buy a book, I buy a nice hardcover copy of it to keep. And I don't really keep paperbacks typically. So almost all of the books that like I'm keeping permanently on my bookshelf are hardcovers. And a while back, I read the Broken Earth trilogy by N.K. Jemisin, and I loved it. And I immediately went on to Amazon and Book Depository and various different places to see if I could find a hardcover set of it. Nope. It's almost exclusively published in paperback. So with a little bit more research, I found a couple of special edition hardcover copies of this series. They're very limited. The cheapest one that I found was like $700 for the whole series, but they often go upwards of $2,000 for the whole series. And I just don't have that kind of money. $2,000 for me is like a whole vacation to another country. I'm just not willing to spend that much money on 3 books. maybe someday, like if I'm ever really rich and I can have like a private custom library, I'll go buy that really fancy series. But from now, I'll just sit and dream. So that's the end of the whale tag. I hope that you found this interesting. If you did, hit the like button and comment down below, what's your favorite whale? There's many more besides the ones that were mentioned in this tag, so feel free to pick something completely different. And if you're not already subscribed to this channel, you know what to do. Hit that subscribe button down below, as well as the notification bell, so that you never miss a video, and that way we can see each other again in the future. Thanks so much for joining. Bye.